Welcome to the digital version of Tiny Talks, where we speak to interesting people and open up a discussion for the topics that they've discussed. Hello, everybody. It is Hayden Green again, and this is yet another installment of our Tiny Talk series. We're doing it digitally and online, and we are thankful for all of you who are still hanging with us after all the things that have happened, and we've moved to a digital format. Today, we have a world-renowned, award-winning author with us and a fellow college administrator. I'd like to welcome to Tiny Talks Mr. Anthony Otero.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Hayden, so much for having me. I think that the intro was a little too much, but that's cool. Cool.
Is any of the things that I said not true?
No.
All right. So then it's exactly where it needs to be. So, Anthony, how have you been? So there's two fronts I guess we can talk about. How have you been adapting with the shutdown with your job as an administrator and your job and your writing career?
Two totally different answers.
Right.
So as a administrator for Rutgers University, it's been a struggle because you lose a lot of student interaction. So I work for the student centers, and I'm usually used to seeing so many students, and I'm not seeing that now. But there's still a lot of work to do on the back end in terms of closing out the year and then trying to figure out what's going to happen next year or over the summer with students and training. As a writer, it's before I say it's been terrible, I will say that I have been writing, but I haven't been creative writing. So
Gotcha.
what's happening is that I'm writing for things that are necessary, whether it's for policies and procedures for work, or applications for other things. So I've been writing, but I've been creatively writing. I think what I really want to do to get back in the swing of that is just to read more.
Gotcha. Yeah, reading tends to, spark that mind and spark that creativity. It's like, oh, I would write this differently. Oh, okay, well, let me go ahead and write that differently. So leaning into your writing, you are the author of two books. We're waiting on the third. You also are a contributor for HuffPost and a number of different things. So talk to us a little bit about how your approach to writing and what your career has been like so far.
So the approach, when I used to write for the Huffington Post or when I write for different websites, the approach is a little bit different because I'm usually trying to explain something, either factual or non-factual, meaning, because usually for a blog post, you're really writing your opinion, unless you're reviewing like a game, a video game, or a movie.
Right.
That's a little different because you kind of know what you want to say, you map it out, and you write it. For creative writing, like my novels, that's a whole different creative process because you're actually creating something out of nothing. So you have to be completely motivated, and you have to find a way to block things out that are happening around the world and just get it done. So two books. One is called Hanging Upside Down. The other one is called The Book of Isabel. And they both took me respectively 9 months to write each.
Okay.
So yeah.
All right. So in another 9 months, we should see the third one. Okay, great. I have read both the books, so we are, all of your fans are anxiously awaiting that third book. So correct me if I'm wrong. One of your identities or two of your melded identities is that you are Latino male. Is that correct? So
that's correct.
How do you identify it? Like Latino is a very broad spectrum. How exactly do you identify within that?
So I identify, actually, my parents ask me that all the time, like, what are you now? So I identify as a Afro-Latino or Latinx, and I also identify as Puerto Rican / Ecuadorian. So I think because I consider identity to be fluid in most cases, it really depends where I am
Right.
to say what it is that I am.
Right.
Yeah.
and that, you know, a definite nod to intersectionality and how that plays out in all of our lives. So how have the identities that are most salient to you influenced your writing or influenced your market? Like who picks up your books, and is it in any way related to who you are as a writer and what your identities are?
So um, when I wrote the books, my intended audience were just to be men,
Hmm.
whether it was black men or Latino men. Um, what ended up happening is mostly women have read the book. As far as I know, those are the ones who usually give me the most feedback. Um, but I will say that it plays out in very subtle ways by writing, because I didn't necessarily write to say this character is Afro Latino and I'm going to do everything possible to let the audience know that that's exactly what he was.
Right.
That wasn't the case. It was, he's a man that's going through some crazy stuff, much of which is his own fault. Um, but he just happens to be Latino. He happens to be Puerto Rican. So, and it comes out subtly when he's talking to his parents, when he's, making food or anything like that, because that's kind of the way the world is. Like, you walk through the world as an individual who just happens to be an identity of whatever.
Right.
So, but my intended audience wasn't necessarily, well, I'm going to write specifically for Afro Latino men. That was not the case.
Right. But was there ever really the temptation to do that? Because there are definitely authors out there that's like, I'm going to make this so heavy handed that it will appeal to every single Latino or every single Puerto Rican or Dominican or Ecuadorian, just because it's very, very much pandering to that particular identity. Was there ever that temptation?
No, and the reason why there's not that temptation for me is because I always feel that someone's always got to. I don't, and not that I care about other people's comments, but it's always like, well, as a Dominican, I don't identify because of this, or as a Puerto Rican, it's because of that. When you try to sort of nuance your writing or your art to a particular audience, then you're going to have people that are going to say, well, that doesn't, I don't really identify with that. I try to make the writing more broad and more general in themes so that anybody can identify with it,
Right.
and then sort of realize that this is not a story in which the character is being tokenized. You know what I mean? He just
Hmm.
happens to be
Absolutely.
this person. Yeah.
You mentioned your parents asking you what it is that you are this week. And in another one of our interviews, we did talk about we talked to another guest about the fact that the things that they talk about at work don't necessarily play at home with mom and grandma and stuff like that. Have
Mm-hmm.
you crossed those? Have you had that kind of interaction with your family members, whether it's directly mom, dad, grandma, or even some uncle or great uncle or something like that? It's always the uncles, by the way.
It's interesting about my family dynamic because the side of the family is dark skinned. So we have a couple of sprinkles of some people who are lighter. So when I say that I'm Afro Latino or that I identify as black, they get it. Now, my dad's side of the house doesn't necessarily understand what I'm saying.
Right, right,
So it becomes a matter of, I don't understand when you say that you're black when you're Puerto Rican, and I try to be like, or you're American, and I'm like, there's a lack of understanding between like race and sort of skin color, and how that functions through the lens
right.
of people who don't identify with that. And I get a lot of what I get my dad says it's so different with him being in the Navy as a kid. And when I say kid, obviously 18, 19, 20 years old. And him telling me that when he was in the South, he couldn't go to either bathroom.
Right,
You know what I mean?
right,
And I
right,
uniquely identify with that, strangely enough, when it comes to, am I black enough or am I Latino enough or am I not black enough? Like, I've kind of been through that in a way. So his experiences are unique, and I try not to like crap all over them because it's that's the way he lived his life. So he
Right.
doesn't really understand because he's thinking, well, I'm a minority too, but I don't understand why you have to identify as the other minority. So that's why the whole Latino thing is very interesting for people. People don't
Mm-hmm.
grasp it as much,
Yeah.
um, but it's because they're not used to it.
Right. And it's multi-layered.
Yes, it's so multi-layered.
So you spoke about sometimes when you write for the Huffington Post, it's for a movie or a game, a video game, and so it brings up the fact that you are also very much entrenched in what is called nerd culture,
Yep.
comic books, video games, stuff like that. Talk to
hmm
me, growing up as a Puerto Rican Ecuadorian kid, reading comic books, what that felt like for you, what that was like.
Well, I mean, first, I mean, it was amazing to be honest with you because I have such a great imagination, and my mother felt that it was some way it was the best way to get me to read.
Right.
So, and I read a lot. The interesting thing about it, though, is that I didn't see myself in a lot of these books. Now,
Right.
that didn't stop me from necessarily reading it. When you grow up in a world that you don't see yourself in, you kind of just get used to just reading these stories. So I think at the time, I'd either have to, if I wanted to see myself, I'd have to look for John Stewart Green Lantern, he was just coming out around
Right.
like 1982.
Right.
Um, he might have been out before then, but I wasn't reading then. But um, and there's Vibe from the Justice League, who is a terrible character of what it is to be Latino in Detroit, particularly Mexican in Detroit. And I think the way that he was written was terrible. Um, and I mean, it is what it is. He's not the same type of person you see now in the Flash show. I kind of swerved away from those because
Right.
it's just like it was something I just wasn't feeling. I just, you know, that part of the comic book structure I didn't enjoy, so I just stuck to what I knew.
Got it. So, I grew up reading comic books as well. You read DC. I read the superior comic Marvel, and and, but one of and you talk about Vibe and how stereotypical he was written, and and I know we've had conversations about the fact it's like you didn't want to criticize that because that might be the only Latino you would ever see, right?
You
Like
get that's the one you get.
that's the one you get.
Yeah.
And we had, and when I read Marvel, I had characters like Luke Cage. And so
Mm,
the Luke Cage that you see on the TV right now is far more smooth and far more sophisticated than
yep.
the one that I read back in the 80s. And he was literally a minstrel character back in the 80s, 70s and 80s. And it became a little bit later on that he got a little bit of sophistication even in his diction. Like, yeah, he was definitely one of those characters
Mm-hmm.
like, yo, get over here, sucker. And I'm like, oh, really? um, how has being how has being part of a nerd culture played out in your adult life though? Because the other piece of it is that a lot of people see comics and things like that as the realm of teenagers and kids. And when grown men are very heavily invested in it, there is a bit of a stereotype that gets attached to it as well. So how do you see it playing out in your adult life?
It's interesting. Something happened on the way to all the Marvel movies. Is that for some reason comic books became acceptable.
Right.
Um, in the time that I've grown up, where when you're a teenager or when you're in college, people still kind of frowned at you. But then we grew up, and then all of a sudden, you have all these great comic book movies. So, as an adult now, the only issue I have is one: these comic books are really expensive.
Oh my
Two,
God, yes they are.
I'm doing digital comics now, so in terms of reading, the way that I interact with comics are different. But I think the most important thing that I've really immersed myself in is just going to comic book conventions like New York Comic Con or Women in Comics that happen in the different parts of New York City. Last year was in Brooklyn. This year, God willing, depending on what's happening in the world, it's supposed to be in Manhattan.
Okay.
But being a part of that has been a pleasure, and it's allowed me to be a part of a podcast called Black Comics Chat. And what we do, and I literally just got off doing an episode with them before I spoke to you. So what we do mainly is that we interview comic creators of color, particularly independent comic book creators of color.
Right.
So we help promote their new work. If there's any Kickstarters, we make sure that we sort of put them out there. But most importantly, we talk about the art and the culture and what it is to either be Black, Latino, Asian, and creating these works of art. So that's really been a pleasure for me.
Right.
Coincidentally, today's a Saturday for anybody who's listening in the future. We also do cartoon viewing in the morning, Saturday morning cartoons, which is hysterical. You can find us on Twitch for that. But yeah, it's really being a part of that as an adult helps me. It keeps me young, and it helps me. It helps me with my creative juices as well.
Yeah, and it is that Saturday morning cartoon ritual is it's real. That's all I'm going to say about that. I talk to my kids about this all the time. I was like, you guys don't understand. Like, there was a time when cartoons only came on Saturday mornings. And you had to get your butt up early and get downstairs, get your cereal before mom and dad got up and commandeered the TV back, because back then we only had one TV, and make sure you got your Saturday morning cartoons on. So that's real.
Right, and there were only two types of days that you got up before your parents: Christmas and Saturday morning.
That's right. That's right. So, what is next for Anthony Otero? I know there's a third book in the mix, but what's next for you?
Well, yes, I am in the middle of sort of writing the third book. I have put some feelers out there for a comic book that I've written, but I haven't decided on how I want to sort of do that, whether it's a web comic or whatever. I need an artist, to be quite honest with you, so that's kind of what I'm shopping for. And I think now that we're in this state of perpetual quarantine, I probably will have a better chance of shopping that out.
Yeah, everybody needs a job now.
Yeah. So that's pretty much what I'm doing. I'm always, to be honest with you, Hayden, I'm always writing in some way, shape, or form. I may not put it out there, but I have like a bunch of short stories that I keep to myself.
Right.
So, and then I continue either adding to it or writing new stuff.
Right. Well, that's great. And hopefully we get to see some of this product as soon as we possibly can. Where can people find you if they're looking for your stuff right now?
Well, you can find me on Twitter and on Instagram at Latinegro. I have a website, anthonyotero.com, where you can find both books that I mentioned and the link to a third work that I've done called Puerto Rico Strong, which was, it won the Eisner for Best Anthology. I am part of a cast of people who've written for this book. So all proceeds go to people affected from Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. And hopefully, if people still buy, the money will still go down there.
Right.
I mean, there's also the earthquakes that are happening and the terrible things that are going on now. So always support that. At the very least, support that.
Yeah. You can also find all three of those books in the Multicultural Center when we actually reopen to the public. So if you're looking to take a peek and see if this is something that you want to buy, you can take a test drive, but go ahead and buy it anyway.
It'd be much appreciated.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We didn't get even to talk about Puerto Rico Strong, but that's a seminal piece of work, and I really appreciate that that's out there and that you were a contributor on that one as well. But definitely, we've had students who have used Puerto Rico Strong as part of workshops on the campus. So again,
that's awesome.
It's a book that's available in the Multicultural Center, and I highly encourage people to go ahead and check that out. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much, Anthony. I appreciate your time.
No problem. problem. Thank you for having me.
And so this again has been our continued series, Tiny Talks, and it happens every Wednesday at noon. Tune in next week as we talk to yet another interesting person, and that brings you all different types of information based on identity, based on multiculturalism, and based on really awesome folk. So this has been Hayden Green talking to Anthony Otero again, and we'll see you next week. Have a great one.
Take care.